Hey everybody, it's Dr. Brown here. I wanted to talk about a topic that I think is very, very important for people at every consultation, new patient visit that I do. I review the mechanism of eating, the three things a person has to do when they eat. The counting as you chew, the timing of the break between bites, and then the third thing is really focusing one's attention on the sensory signals. It's incredibly important, and if a person is going to be successful permanently after bariatric surgery, this is something that really has to be recognized and practiced. So I thought we would talk about what you could call the neurology of eating. Now, if you think about it, even if you don't think about it, eating is always a neurological event. We eat always in response to a neurological stimulus or trigger. For example, I feel hungry. That's neurological. Or I see or smell food, or I'm bored, or I'm stressed out, or I'm worried, or tired. All of these things are neurological things that can trigger us or cause us to eat. And the act of eating actually can give us a very powerful and direct pathway or mechanism to influence and even change the brain. So it's very important, and I wanted to review it in detail, explain again what we want to be doing when we eat, as well as why. And maybe that's the more interesting topic, is why these things are so important. So first, I think it's worthwhile to acknowledge that what we eat affects the brain very dramatically. And so not only is it important for a person to be practicing certain behaviors when they eat, what they are actually eating is equally as important. If we eat a high sugar food, for example, that will have a certain effect on the brain in certain areas of the brain. That's very problematic and will cause issues for us. One very interesting experiment that's been done and repeated several times is you take a group of people, group of individuals, and you numb up their mouths and their noses so that they can't taste anything, they can't smell anything, and you give them 5 glasses of a liquid that looks like water. From appearance, from texture, you can't tell the difference. And in one of the 5 glasses, you put in glucose. So you have these people have a drink from each of these 5 glasses of liquid, and they can't taste a difference, they can't smell a difference. So they have a drink of each of the 5 glasses of liquid, and you give them a little break, you bring them back, and you give them a choice. They can drink from any of the 5 glasses of liquid. Which one do they choose every time? It's the one with glucose in it. Even though they can't taste it, they can't smell a difference, there's no sensory means that we typically think of, no sensory means that they can distinguish between what is in these liquids. They will choose the one with glucose. And it's a very interesting experiment that demonstrates that there's a lot going on in the brain when we're eating or when we're drinking that we have no idea is actually happening. Eating is neurological. Another experiment. We've talked before about the engineering in the food industry. It's very sophisticated, very impressive. And really, much of the engineering in foods, from one perspective, they want to make foods that are enjoyable. But also, they want to create and engineer foods that bring people back and want to consume them again. Well, they know how to do it. They're very good at it. And it really has to do with influencing the brain through the texture, smell, content. Every feature of a food can be engineered. So you take a food that is primarily carbohydrate, and people are actually quite good at estimating how many calories would be in that food. as well as what it would cost to purchase that food. You go to a different macronutrient, fat. You take a food that is primarily fat in its content. People, again, are pretty good at estimating how many calories are going to be in that food as well as what it would cost to buy that food. Well, if you combine, you take sugar and fats, you mix them, very interesting effect on the brain. People can no longer estimate how many calories are in that food or what it would cost to purchase that food. It shows that by altering pretty simple elements of a food, the brain can be altered in its activity and capacity. And this very much can influence how much of a food a person will eat and whether they come back to it. So again, eating is neurological, and it's important for us to recognize that. So let's review the concepts of eating. One, we want to be eating a low-carb food that is not processed. Meat and eggs, as you hear me say, really are the best foods for human beings. But there are those three things that we need to do when we eat. First is to chew every bite 20 to 40 times and count. The second thing is to take a timed 1-minute break between bites, meaning when you swallow a bite, gulp, you take your timer that all of you should have been given, or some means of timing. You start your timer, and you don't put the next bite in your mouth until 1 minute is up. Now, these behaviors really don't have much of anything to do with the texture of the food or even time. They really are about brain activity, what's going on in the brain when we are doing these things as we eat. It's really like we are sitting at that control panel and we're turning some switches in the brain on, others we are turning off. And we repeat this over and over and over every time we eat. And ultimately, we are creating new circuits, new patterns, new networks in the brain. The third thing we want to do when we eat is to avoid distractions. TV, phone, computer. We want to avoid any distractions out of us and focus our attention as much as we can on the sensory signals going from the body, especially the stomach, into the brain. Very important for us. One of our sort of common enemies is distraction when we eat for a lot of different reasons. And processed foods, hyperpalatable foods, one of the elements in the engineering is to keep the brain and the stomach or the intestines from communicating with each other. And if we are giving assistance to that by watching TV or flipping through the phone or on a computer or other activities that are distracting us, it will very much promote sort of uncontrolled eating. So there are 7 centers in the brain involved in all this, really. And when I say involved in this, what is this? Well, it's weight, it's appetite, it's metabolism, it's cravings, hunger pains, all kinds of things. The brain is very, very sophisticated. It is the ultimate integrating machine in the universe. And there are 7 centers in the brain involved in all of these things that we're talking about with food and with weight. One of them is called the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. It really is the executive center, the ultimate master in the brain. Another one is generically called the limbic system, the basal ganglia, the amygdala. This is the primitive brain, and it is a center of emotion, fear, this type of thing. And so if you think about emotional eating, which we're all familiar with, it's very much involved in eating. The third one would be the hypothalamus. This is really, if there's one thermostat in the brain, one area in the brain that is the master control of weight, it's the hypothalamus. And it is at the center of regulating food intake and appetite and a set point for weight. Another center of the brain would be the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is really the clearinghouse or the center for memory formation and memory retrieval. And you might be thinking, well, what in the world do memories have to do with eating and weight? Well, it's incredibly important. So if we think about emotional eating, for example, say you're stressed out and You want to be comforted. Well, one common behavior is to eat certain foods. Well, why would a food offer comfort? Well, it's because that food is attached to a certain meaning. The food means something, and that meaning is based in memories. You think of how does any child get out of childhood without having placed very deeply seated and profound meanings on food? Earliest memories are typically of mom providing food and nourishment. It's very meaningful. It can be used as a punishment, as a reward. It's love. Food means a lot to us, and central to meaning is memory. Another area or system is called the HPA axis. Hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. You can think of the classic fight or flight response. You see a bear in the forest as you're hiking. The stress response in the body is activated, and your body will do certain things involuntarily. Well, at the core of that system is this HPA axis, and it's very much involved in eating and appetite. There is what's called the medulla oblongata, and that's sort of fun to say. Medulla oblongata. It is really the filter of all the sensory information coming from the organs of the abdomen, primarily the stomach, the intestines. All of that sensory data coming through the vagus nerve is filtered or gated at this structure in the brain, base of the brain, called the medulla oblongata. And from there, those signals ultimately go to a bunch of different areas in the brain. And these areas, these centers in the brain, communicate with each other. And they have essentially what are programs for eating and for appetite. One other center in the brain, which I don't totally understand how it works, but it's called the cerebellum. And cerebellum classically is involved in maintenance of balance, position, movement, behaviors like this. And it's central to a person negotiating their place in space and the objects around them. Very important. And it is involved in food and weight regulation. So there's a newer field in neurology called neuroeconomics. And this is, in essence, the brain activity or the neurology of making decisions. It could be decisions about money or dating or whatever. Neuroeconomics is the study of the brain processes involved in making decisions. And if you back up and you think about weight and obesity and all these things, well, ultimately it's about decisions. And on a very simple or base plane or perspective, the secret or the key to having a healthy weight permanently, as well as reversing diabetes, etc., is simply to make the right decision every time for the rest of your life. Well, the key or the secret is we can actually create programs and networks in the brain to do that, to help us with that. If we create those new programs or defaults in the brain, it actually becomes very easy to make the right decision, and it's not a matter of exerting tremendous willpower or discipline. So it's really important for us, and I would encourage you to buy into simply practicing these things consistently. And in my experience, it's pretty impressive what happens to people. And brain scans show very clearly after surgery, when people do these things consistently, they've changed very dramatically. The way their brain is organized, its function, even the anatomy and the size of their brain, which is all very cool. The key thing is those are the people that will tell you they feel as though they are in total control. They don't feel hungry, really. They don't have cravings. And I think the most powerful thing is they don't feel deprived, like they're missing out on anything. If that sounds too good to be true, I see it all the time, and it's really fun to watch. The payoff for these simple behaviors is pretty amazing.